In this upcoming series of videos, we're going to explore the books of Daniel and Ezekiel, along with key parts of the New Testament. Now here's the big question. Do Daniel and Ezekiel connect with each other? And more importantly, how does that connection help us understand the resurrection? To begin, in this first video, we need to identify one key figure. Who is the king in Daniel 11, especially in the final verse where he dies? To answer that, we're not just staying in one chapter. We'll also look at Daniel 12, which clearly connects to Daniel 11. And we'll bring in Ezekiel chapters 4, 5, and 9 as well. Now, when we read Daniel 11, most scholars agree that the king being described is Antiochus IV Epiphanes, specifically his rule and reign. And when you look closely at verses 36 through 45, something stands out. The passage consistently refers to the same person, using he and him all the way through. So the question is, does that same person continue right to the end? Let's take a closer look at Daniel 11:45. And he shall plant the tents of his palace between the seas, in the glorious holy mountain. Yet he shall come to his end, and none shall help him. There are two important things happening in this verse. First, it speaks about him setting up his presence between the seas and the glorious holy mountain, which strongly points to Jerusalem. But then it says, he shall come to his end and none shall help him. These are two separate ideas. It's not saying he dies in that exact location. It's saying he establishes himself in one place, and then later he comes to his end. Now, some debates come in here. People argue about where exactly Antiochus died, whether in Syria, Persia, or elsewhere. But the real issue isn't the exact location. The real issue is identity, who this passage is actually talking about. Let's also look at verse 43, which is often debated. It says he will have power over the treasures of gold and silver in Egypt, and that the Libyans and Ethiopians will follow him. Now, historically, we do know that Antiochus campaigned in Egypt. But did he control all its wealth? Not necessarily. So the language here doesn't have to mean total ownership. It can simply mean strong influence or significant control. And when you keep reading, the pattern stays consistent. Verse 41, he enters the land. Verse 42, he stretches out his hand. Verse 43, he gains power over Egypt's treasures. Verse 44, news from the east and north troubles him. And then verse 45, it's still the same he. There's no shift to a different person. So when you follow the flow from verse 36 all the way to the end, it's clearly describing one continuous figure. And that's why we can confidently say this is referring to Antiochus IV Epiphanes. Now this is where Daniel 12 becomes very important, because it begins with the words, at that time. That phrase connects it directly back to Daniel 11. In other words, what happens in chapter 12 flows out of what we just read. So we're now dealing with events connected to the time of that king's death, which historically points to around 164 BC. But before we go deeper into that, we need to build the foundation properly. Because in the next parts of this series, we're going to bring in Ezekiel chapters 4, 5, and 9, and show how they line up with the timelines in Daniel 8, 11, and 12. And this leads us to a much bigger topic, the resurrection. If you've ever wondered whether resurrection must always be understood as physical, or whether Scripture presents something deeper, then this series is for you. Because we're going to explore the idea that God has already carried out judgment on historical Israel, not just as a future event, but something that has already taken place in history. This will be a multi-part series, part 1, part 2, and part 3. And each part builds on the last. So if you want to fully understand Daniel 12 and what it says about the new covenant and the authority given to the Son, Jesus Christ, then make sure you follow the entire series.